Well, I guess where to start with something like this. We all have our own anecdotes, but I did find myself in a slightly strange position last week. I was speaking at a conference with other international panellists talking about media law and media policy developments in their own country. And I had the good fortune to go after someone from Nigeria. And he was just talking about, they released, passed a freedom of information law, they just licensed lots of community radio, all these great things that are going on in Nigeria. And then it came to me and everyone was staring at me. And I thought, what an amazing situation when it is the UK, which is where everyone is looking to for the sharpest expose of a completely corrupt media system. And we'll talk about the other corrupt systems that accompany this. So this is where we've got to, and I want to spend my 10 minutes saying that we should take this very seriously. That I think this has huge implications. And I say that, I guess you all agree because you're here, but I think there are real arguments, not just, as Faizy said, you know, all sorts of politicians saying move on, so that we don't uncover too many embarrassing things, but quite incredible stuff by some journalists. Some liberal journalists who have a bit more time for saying, listen, let's not rush into regulation. If we regulate too quickly and too far, we run the risk of giving up all that is great about British democracy, and we will undermine the freedom of the press. I think there are all sorts of problems with that argument. It's entirely possible to think of forms of regulating the media, forms of organising the media, so they don't end up with the kind of corruption, complicity, attacks on individuals, the complete scandalous behaviour we've seen. But there's another, I guess, more laughable explanation of why we should move on, why this isn't, and justifications for the whole scandal. And that is, if you're bothered, to read some of the Tory commentators, the people who still write for News International, who come up with brilliant stuff still at the moment. Trevor Kavanagh, who is the ex-political editor of The Sun, a very powerful voice for many years, he's now stepped down. But he just wrote a couple of days ago, basically saying this whole thing has been concocted and kept going by liberals, journalists at The Guardian and particularly at the BBC. He writes, I believe Rupert Murdoch has been a tremendous force for good in the media world. The real problem, the real corruption, the real monopolist is the BBC, and that's where we should look. And an even, I think, a much more strange, eccentric intervention is Melanie Phillips in the Daily Mail. I don't actually recommend you reading this. It's long, but I mean the whole thing is, if Miliband is such a hero, why doesn't he take on the BBC? And it's pages and pages. Miliband, she says, argues that Murdoch has too much power over British life. This is disingenuous, for if there is a media oligarchy which exercises far more media power in Britain than News International, that organisation is the BBC, and that's what we've got to stop, and we should move on. Now, I think it is not a good time to be moving on for this. And there are three reasons why we should take this seriously, three big implications of all of this. The first is it is actually a chance to tackle the corruption and lack of democracy at the heart of the media. And I think this is a serious... There's all sorts of pessimism, and I don't know what my other panellists and what all of you are going to say. Yes, it's true, we could just be naturally pessimistic. We've seen huge scandals. We've seen the financial scandal. We've seen the scandal with overpaying expenses in Parliament. Both of those have not ended up in structural reforms, in the kinds of reforms we would like to see. That doesn't mean that we should just apply that logic to what goes on in the media. They are really running scared. They are nervous about this. And it's a battle, I think, of whose voice, whose organisation, whose vision for the media is going to win out. And I mean, partly it's revenge, I think, for many people, that Murdoch and it's not just about Murdoch, but the kind of media moguls epitomised by Murdoch have made our lives hellish for a long time. They are the people who have celebrated going to war. They've celebrated all the things that we stand against. And to force them onto the defensive and to come up with ways of organising a media system so there is more involvement by ordinary people, more accountability to these proprietors, more ways of getting genuine diverse views, more ways of actually having a debate on the issues. You think about a lack of debate on things like immigration, where it's taken for granted that it is a problem, or that going to war is seen as being in the national interest. So these are serious debates about how we should throw out old media systems and move forward to the new. So that's one, I think, important reason for taking it seriously. The second, I guess I've touched on a little bit, which is, I think, this makes it harder for all the people who are still the powerful to launch their austerity, to implement the cuts, to keep the troops in Afghanistan. I think it's very important that the media are a central force by which people, they don't, no brainwashing that goes on, but it makes it so much easier in order for them to carry out the kinds of attacks that we've seen for many years. And Murdoch is a particular expression of that kind of ideology, of a neoliberal ideology. Some people just say he's just a media mogul, pure and simple. All he cares about is the bottom line. It's just about profits, and he'll get rid of the news of the world just to save his skin and try and take control of satellite TV. Well, that's all true, except that it's completely partial, because he's also a deeply ideological person. He is committed to a set of ideas that I think people don't take that project seriously enough. He doesn't speak that often. We know he doesn't speak that often in public to MPs. This is the first time yesterday ever he was forced to be accountable to MPs. But what he has done on occasion is stand up and talk about his hero. Now, who would you expect? This is public, there's no secret about this. Who would you expect his all-time hero is? Doesn't take that much imagination, Father. Thatcher, a goddess, an absolute goddess that he has written lengthy speeches about, that we should be eternally grateful for what Thatcher has done. And he sees himself, through using his media power, as bringing about the sort of society, a neoliberal society that she was associated with. And so when we try and bring Murdoch down, we try and break apart the Murdoch project, I think it makes it that much more difficult for our rulers to talk about a legitimacy of the necessity of cuts, that it is all right to attack the most vulnerable people in this world, that it is in any way rational or humane to launch the kind of wars that we've seen. So their ideological power, which I think is very much up for grabs, is another reason why we should take this so seriously. So it's not just an economic project, it is a set of ideas which I think now millions of people are starting to ask questions about. And do I have time to go into my third one? The third one, I think, is probably one of the biggest, if not the most easiest just to pin down. But it teaches us, and us in this room, it teaches millions of people who are witnessing all of this unfolding day by day some very important lessons about power. You get taught about power in school, but it's just, partly it's very difficult ever to challenge power, that it's difficult to pin it down. I think people are learning a lot of lessons about how the world works. Because if you think about that people are now talking about corruption as if it is completely, they've seen through it. Now, to talk about corruption, one institution being utterly corrupt, that's a pretty useful lesson for many people. To talk about two institutions, central institutions, being corrupt, people might start to make links. But what this scandal has done is to say that there are three institutions working off each other, all of which, feeding off each other, are entirely corrupt, of the heights of press, top politicians, and whole echelons of the police. And I think that teaches us a very big lesson about how this world works. They try and separate each domain from another. The police are over there, politics and parliament is over there, economics is in another corner, and the news rises above it in all its integrity. Well, we've seen now how it works, that they live with each other. We've seen the facts today that the Metropolitan Police are effectively the in-house PR agency for News International. I wasn't aware of this until today, that round about a quarter of all the people who are working in the Met's Public Relations Office have previously worked for News International. You think about those are the kind of structural, not accidental connections that we're seeing. Murdoch, all right, he may have gone in the back door to number 10, but he got into the back door, I forget how many times now, there's something like 50 times in the last couple of years that media moguls have had these private discussions that no one else has had access to. And we know the relationships that lie at the heart of all of this. So it's a kind of demonstration, not just of an accidental corruption, but that something structurally is wrong with the system as a whole. And that is an amazing lesson that people are learning very quickly. What's incredible, I just had to think about this the other day, is about Watergate in the 70s. Someone asked me to write something about Watergate in the 70s. People may be familiar with it, but it was effectively a scandal in the early 70s which brought down the President of the US. And it had all sorts of other implications as well. But it took 5 years to work through. 5 years of different organising, the end of the Vietnam War, putting great pressure on politicians, some good journalistic work. It took 5 years. We have seen the panic spread amongst our rulers inside 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And none of them, this is the beauty of it, none of them know when it's going to stop, because they have so much invested in all of this. So it is an amazing time both to learn the lessons of what power in a capitalist society looks like, an amazing opportunity for us to make a real change in terms of the kind of media system we want that should reflect what we as ordinary people need. Actually to learn genuinely about what goes on and not just be fed all these ideas and justifications for austerity and war. And because of that, I think that's the debate we should be having. Don't be misled by people trying to bury it. Don't be misled by pessimists just saying, if it goes up, it will definitely come down, and that's the way the world works. This is an opportunity I think we should seize in all sorts of different ways, of organising more protests whenever these people get together, of doing everything we can to try and put forward an alternative media like the one that Counterfire is involved with, and tying it more generally to a new kind of project that says we can do a lot better than the kinds of politicians, press, God forbid, police who run our society. Thank you very much.